Nelia has sort of taken you through that what happens when things go wrong, where in the brain do things go wrong. Now I'm going to talk to you about what happens after things go wrong. What do we do? Because we have a moral responsibility, formal responsibility to take care of things. So what I'm going to take you through is what we can do to make things a little better. Yeah? And I'm going to start with this. This is a story. This is a story that stretches back to 2006, and it is based on a real child, like the name has been changed. But this story, as told to me by my teacher, is about Arjun and his mother. So in 2006, Arjun, who's 3 years old at that point, is referred by the school to a psychologist because he's not speaking and he's often very restless. And when he does meet the psychologist, no eye contact, doesn't respond to name call, some sounds, sensory issues are there, and he has a lot of spinning activities as well. Now, if I ask you now, what is the problem? I think we all know. What is it? So it's ADHD, right? So what should the psychologist do next, according to you? Just shout it out. Anything. What should they do next? So school has referred, psychologist has seen. So assessment should be done. Fantastic. Basic therapies. Brilliant. Nelia stressed upon something else also. Sensory issues, no? I mean, sensory is the hearing, the vision, yeah? So this is what really happened. This is what the psychologist did. The psychologist actually did a hearing assessment. Like you said, the screening tool, MCHAT, was used, therapies was suggested, other detailed severity scoring for the ADHD was done using the CARS at that point. And the parent was in denial, as you can expect, and the psychologist helped the parent see some of these ADHD behaviors and sort of connect it and say why this is not in keeping with the normal development. But the psychologist did something way more. What she did is that she's able to recognize and say this mother had two fears. One is the mother thought she caused the autism. She had married late, she had the child late, and she was very stressed during pregnancy. So the psychologist was able to pick up not just the autism signs, but able to look at it and say, here is a mother who's feeling very overwhelmed because an overwhelming sense of guilt. And she also believed at that point that there is nothing she could do to make this better. And the psychologist addressed it. So there's a lot of understanding that happens first and diagnosing happening last. There's a lot of listening happening first, if you notice here, before the labeling happens. What are the reflections from this encounter of Arjun and his mother? So one is definitely the school did a great job. The school was able to pick up something and refer to a professional. Nelia has already taken you through all the red flags of autism as such. Early referral made a big difference because psychologists were able to initiate interventions and address the parental fears. What does the evidence say? When we do these early interventions in the treatment, we are targeting only the symptoms. But it will not be the same for every child with autism. If you have 5 children with autism, all of them are the same age, and we give the same therapies to all of them, each of the 5 might respond very, very differently. So there's a lot of variability now. And therefore, how we make it better should also be different. It should be personalized to each of these 5 children. Think of it like a headache. If you had 10 people with headache or 5 people with headache, I can't give the same pill or the same tablet to every person who has a headache. One person might have a headache because of a vision difficulty. Another person because of sinuses. For another person, it could be just dehydration. For one person, it could be something very rare as a tumor or something like that. It can go on. There are multiple causes of headache. And in every sense, I should be able to understand the type of the headache, the cause of the headache before I decide the treatment. Similar in autism as well. You will see in these 5 children, one has more language-based difficulties than social difficulties, another one vice versa. One might have sensory issues as a prominent complaint. So the interventions must be very, very tailored, it must be extremely personalized. So when we look at this, I spoke to you about the awareness of the school, the awareness of the psychologist, and when we look at screening, who can screen is the question. And there is this delusion that professionals have, and when I say professionals here, I mean psychiatrists, I mean perhaps medical professionals more than anybody, that we can be everywhere and when we can do everything. That's a delusion. We can't. And therefore, the building capacity to allow for others to screen, and that is therapists, nurses, teachers, social workers, special educators. There must be an intent that we build capacity such that anybody can screen for autism. Because the prevalence of autism, I don't know if anyone knows prevalence of autism now. How common is autism? Is what I'm asking. 1 in 60? 1 in 33? Okay. In 1978, when the first statistic for autism came out, it was 1 in 5,000. 1 in 5,000, 1978. Last year, CDC put up a statistic which was 1 in 36 in the US. In India, current studies 2 years back says 1 in 69. Again, that's underreported. Can you imagine 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 36? How many people are there in this room today? Yeah. So that's the increase in prevalence of autism. And therefore, we need to build capacity to help others train. And I can prove it to you. The postman story that I put there. So this is a person I know in Morocco. They decided that autism, their prevalence was 1 in 300. So they were like, how can it be 1 in 300? So they wanted to screen every child in every household for autism. What they did, they trained the postman who would deliver mail to screen for autism. It did. It worked. The child units were full. The pediatric units were full in the next 6 months. It worked. So it is possible. Yeah. So these are people who can screen. Of course, those who screen can therefore refer later on, like this Arjun story where the psychologist, where school referred to the psychologist, to the psychiatrist, to the developmental pediatrician, and a whole host of specialists. Yeah. One of the questions that was asked in the form was, when do these autism symptoms first appear? I think, like you saw in Arjun's case here, it appeared when he was between 11 to 18 months. But there are cases where it can appear even for the first time much before that. In 13% of the cases, less than 1 year. In 13%, between 1 year to 2 years as well. Yeah. But most children across the world, in fact, the mean age in the US right now is 4. We at our most centers here in India, most centers are able to recognize autism as early as 2 years of age. We are now moving towards being able to confidently say a child is at risk for autism as early as 18 months. And Nelia emphasized on why early intervention. You remember that pruning the trees, yeah? Why it makes such a big difference. So all the data tells you it is possible to diagnose early. So when you look at treatment, like somebody said, speech and language, occupational therapy was initiated for Arjun, but you have a whole host of other therapies and treatments which I will come to. Arjun has gone older now. He is now, this is 2010, Arjun has become 7 years of age. He's received all these early interventions, receiving still at 2010. Play-based therapy has started. Parents now are beginning to build some structure and routine at home, and he starts to request items with gesticulations and uses, non-verbal communication has also improved. So what do we know? What do we reflect from this? One is definitely early intervention helps. Yeah, it increases engagement. You know the things, but why does it help? And how does it help? Not every form of early intervention helps. Early intervention really makes a difference when it is intense intervention. I'm not talking about an intervention that happens once a week. I'm not talking about an intervention that happens once a month. It must be intense and it must be parent-centered. So when I say parent-centered, what I mean, and this is experiential from what I notice in the autism clinic and ROPDs, is a lot of the interventions, they go to speech therapy, OT therapy back home. And while the child spends 2-3 hours with the therapist a week, perhaps more, the child spends at least hundreds of hours with the parent in that same week. And therefore, the therapy only equips a child with the skills. But unless he practices those skills fade away. Think of it like having a, think of it like, how many of you know how to drive a car? How many of you drive a car? Now imagine if I asked you to read the manual of the car and learn how to drive the car at home. You have the manual. See, you can see it's very obvious, isn't it? So the learning can only happen on the road. Similarly, for therapies also, no matter how good the therapist is, no matter how right that program is, without parent-centered interventions, without home-based interventions, there will always be a vacuum. I spoke about structure, and I think that's obvious. I won't go into too much detail. There must be a routine, there must be a clear expectation, clear goals for therapy and at home in terms of a timetable. The other important part is the last part here, which is peerling, and this is why I really think Arjun had a lot of improvement. Yeah. So when I say peerling interventions, the idea is that, again, a little bit like the practicing of a skill I said, socialization makes a very big difference. And one of the common things parents will face a challenge with, and as therapists you would have heard, is parents say that, we take him to the park, but he just doesn't mingle with anybody. We try our best. We take him to a family friend's house. He or she doesn't just mingle with anybody. And that is understandable. But that is not the end of an intervention. That should be the starting point of an intervention. The idea is that a lot of children do start by parallel play. They will sit next to the other child who are playing, they will observe, and they'll slowly get faded in. Social scripting at home, asking the child, can I play with you? Can we build this together? They make a very big difference, because I have seen children with mild autism going to some of the best therapy centers across the country, not achieving goals, developmental goals, simply because there is no social net and social community around. And that is difficult because sometimes, and understandably as parents, there are 50 things to do. But unfortunately, the nature of autism is such that unless you build a social community around the child with the social deficits, that goals will not be achieved. Combined approaches, like I said, not just in terms of therapy, but in psychosocial approaches, and there are a lot of goals. But what I want to emphasize here, and like it happened with Arjun also, is the point at the bottom of the slide. A lot of times we get referrals, and especially when I was working in the community, I have seen scenarios where the child goes to a particular professional and the professional says, please do an assessment and then come back and we'll start therapy. Now what happens is, in most places the waiting periods for assessments are months together. In fact, I don't know if you know this, in the if you right now went to London, and if you're staying there, your waiting period to get an assessment for autism right now is 3.3 years. If you went to LA, the waiting period is right now 8 years. And if you look at ADHD in the UK, ADHD has stopped taking assessments. Now the waiting period is 18 years. Once it crosses 18 years, they don't take it. So, I mean, we are getting there. I'm just trying to say that we are getting there. This is coming much more closer to home. And as professionals, in whatever capacity you are a medical professional, you are a therapist, I think we need to build an understanding that if we screen, like Arjun's screening happened, we notice early signs, we start interventions that day. The assessments can happen in due course, it will happen in due course, and they can better inform the therapies that you're doing. But we need to be able to start off interventions in day one itself. Of course, if you ask me, each therapy is important, but especially in the early years, there are the top three things that I think can make a big difference. Any guesses what those three things are? Sorry? OT? Speech? Acceptance of parents? Social skills? Special education. See, all your answers are absolutely right. But if you asked me one cornerstone and the top three things, it would be this, and this. And believe me when I say this, I'm not saying communication is only language. That's the point I'm trying to make. That language is just one form of communication. We need to be able to work with children to build other vehicles in which they can express themselves. We have seen children who don't have that form of communication, and sometimes the earnest feeling is, it is not that they don't understand us, it's that we don't understand them. And sometimes when you get that feeling, and I'm sure all of you working with children or parents, you would have gotten that feeling. It's that he or she is trying to tell me something, but I am not getting it. And that can lead to a lot of other downstream effects. I have seen children with poor communication at 2 years, 3 years, being described as having ADHD. Imagine if I lock these doors and you can't talk, and as an adult, if one of you can't talk, and you are trying to tell me you want to get out of this room, can you imagine the confusion it would create and the chaos it would create? That's the same thing for a child with autism. And I've seen children with 2 years, 3 years, because they're not able to express themselves, being labeled as ADHD as well. So communication, and never ever give up on communication, no matter how late. We have seen children who are 10 years, 12 years, 13 years, with the right level of support, be able to express themselves. Now, of course, today we have more avenues to support these parents and these children. We have Abbas app, the alternative augmentative communication, we have Kidora, we have several other lines of technology and other PECs, I can go on. So, but we do have supports that are available. And it is called augmentative communication for a reason. It is meant to augment the existing skills. And the myth that once you start AAC, speech won't come is not true. That there is a myth and a misconception. We prescribe AAC and we don't start AAC because that means that we have given up hope that the speech can never come, the child can never talk. That is not true. It's only meant to assist and augment. Okay. Sometimes when you see, like in Arjun, some children respond very early, but there are children you can do everything right up to this point. You have gotten the screening right, you have started intervention, you have done the assessments, you have educated the parents on home-based interventions, everything is happening. But sometimes you'll see whatever you do, there is no progress. But believe me, the lack of progress is not a failure, it's a signal. And it's a signal to just take a pause, reflect, and see if you can tweak the plan. And what should you tweak? You need to ask yourself, were the treatment goals that we set developmentally appropriate? Is the therapy setting in which the child got exposed to the intervention appropriate? Has there been new challenges emerging like behavior problems, anxiety for example? Is there a sync between what is happening at home and what is happening in the therapy center? Are we involving the family very meaningfully? Because like I said, again, for whatever reason, if the parents are unable to get involved, it makes a very, very big difference. The last point is the one that I see very commonly, and I see children's daily schedule extremely packed and extremely full. I had a 3-year-old who was diagnosed with autism a few months back, and we started therapies, and actually it was 6 months back when we started therapies, and we noticed that there was absolutely no change, and in fact there was worsening each time. And just asking the routine day of the child's day starts at 6:30 a.m. So then he goes to play with the child is taken to play in the community for an hour or so, goes to school till 2:30, play school till 2:30, and then goes to therapies, is in therapies till 6:30. From 7 onwards till 8:30, he is taught pre-academic skills. Remember, I'm talking about a 3-year-old here, right? And then from 9 to 10:30, there's a family ritual that he has to stay with the parents, and both of them are on their phones most of the time. Now, the idea, the spotlight here is, if the schedule is so chaotic and so busy, and there is there's no free time and there is no play time, it makes it very difficult. And the child was getting therapies, very regularly. The therapist was doing such an earnest job, but sometimes you can do everything right but end up on the wrong end of the stick. And sometimes these are the factors that, like I put on the slide, that you need to evaluate if you notice that therapy is not working out. Arjun has grown older. Now from 2010 we go to 2014. Arjun is now 11 years of age. He's more verbal. He's independent in his self-help skills. He attends a special school, NIOS curriculum. There was a shadow teacher initially. In fact, when we saw Arjun last in 2010, there was a shadow teacher around. But over time, as the need reduced, the shadow teacher was faded out. Comprehensive assessment, developmental assessments was done, and it was done sequentially as well. So every once in a year, he would get some assessments done. And over the next few years, he actually started participating a lot more in school assemblies. His social skills improved, and he in fact even started public speaking. You wouldn't believe, I mean, if you saw Arjun's videos when he was 3 and Arjun's videos now when he was 11, you wouldn't believe it's the same kid. I mean, he was actually. So every time there was an assembly, they used to ask for volunteers to come and recite the school anthem. Every day, earnestly, he'll put up his hand. He would be the first person, and you wouldn't believe that he spoke so well. From a child who barely spoke to be doing public speaking was a big, big jump. So what are the reflections at this point? If you noticed, I said this earlier, that he developed self-help skills. Now again, experientially, the point I want to spotlight here is that this self-help skills is a very, very important target. Many a times we have come across families where, and even sometimes ourselves as professionals, the entire focus goes on saying how much was a child speaking a year back, how much is a child speaking now, and were there tantrums, were there hyperactivity before, has that reduced now? But sometimes we also don't ask for other questions, including things like activities of daily living, feeding, dressing, toileting. And that is a very, very important target. In the midst of achieving all the developmental targets, especially the social and the language domain, sometimes we forget aerials are one of the most important things. And here, in terms of his schooling, like you could see in Arjun's schooling, inclusion was initially about part-time school and therapy. He used to have a shadow teacher, he used to attend only half day of school, but then go to therapy. But then the school did a nice thing, and in terms of with some professional assistance as well, is to when to withdraw the shadow. When to withdraw a shadow is as important as when to introduce a shadow. And there is this whole school of thought that parents as shadows, not having somebody outside of parents as shadows, and there is no right answer really, because initially, even if parents are shadows, and that's most times because of a lack of availability too long. So knowing when to withdraw a shadow is very, very important. Like you saw in Arjun's case, I mentioned developmental assessments for them. So the question, like one of you asked in the forms, was why do we do assessments? What is the point of assessments? Especially for children when they are more than 5 years, 6 years of age. Why do we do assessments? So we do it because in this case, the assessment helped his mother understand strengths. Because when you do assessments, the myth is we are trying to look at the deficits. The biggest objective of any developmental assessment or psychometric assessment is to find out what is the strength of the child. Is this child a kinetic learner? Is this child an auditory learner? Is she a visual learner? How much of complex sequencing can we introduce? What is the level of executive functions? So it helps us understand what are the strengths of the child and how do we tailor everything in the environment to help the child learn better and learn faster. The assessments also help guide the therapist to set individualized goals, whether now we need to move from vocabulary-based things to pragmatic language. Looking at in terms of the school as well, the school has helped to understand. In fact, the school did mention that the reason that they started reducing the shadow because assessment showed progressive improvements as well. So these are some of the things why we use an assessment for. And a lot of evidence does say that, in terms of, like he was in NIO school, having a structured, inclusive setting does make a big difference, especially with peer modeling and social skills that we need. And the general rule of thumb is we want to include children in a typical setting to whatever extent that is possible, and every child should go to school as much as possible for as long as possible. That is the baseline rule of thumb that we follow. But this word inclusion, it is sometimes underused, sometimes it is overused, sometimes the word is abused. And inclusion is and adaptation of curriculum. I mean, if you ask me what inclusion means, and I'll show you what inclusion means to me, I've drawn it, I'll show you that. But inclusion does mean how can you adapt the curriculum to support the child? How can we reduce the curriculum? How can we adapt the environment? And there are different ways in terms of that. You will see this visual schedule, which I'm sure all the special educators use, and you will see that in schools as well. But the point I'm trying to say is that when you say inclusion and assessment, sorry, I just go past this. I just have finished the assessment part. So I'll come to inclusion again. So when we look at assessments, these are things we look for. We look at cognitive skills, language skills, family beliefs, school expectations, and it's a very good lens for understanding things. And these are different checklists for autism that we use. The ones in bold are the ones that we use at our center. Some of them are paid tools, but very good tools and very well validated tools to look at autism and the severity. And honestly, the Indian scale for assessment for autism is actually a very good scale to understand some of the baseline abilities. But there are some gold standard diagnostic evaluations, quote unquote gold standard across the world, especially these two things, ADI-R and ADOS-2. Now, it takes, any idea how long it takes to do an ADOS-2? Has anyone heard of ADI and ADI-R and ADOS? Anybody? Good. If you haven't heard of it, good. I say that simply because it takes 2 hours sometimes. 2 hours initially, if you have not gotten a hang of it, it will take 4 hours to do it. Can you imagine observing a child for 4 hours in a locked room? You don't need them to make the clinical diagnosis. They will only provide evidence sometimes to incorporate the clinical picture you're already seeing. Like the school teacher who saw Arjun, who did not need ADI and ADOS to say that this could be autism. You don't need it. But sometimes we do it because when you go to the UK, when you go to Europe, sometimes only the ADI and the ADOS are accepted. Those are the only circumstances where we have done the ADOS and the ADI. Otherwise, just good qualitative methods, just an interview with the parents, just real world observation where you're seeing a child play with you, and school reports and any other extended family inputs make a very big difference. So the idea is, don't go in search of the gold standard diagnostic evaluation, ADI, ADOS. They are very expensive, but they are not worth it. The other question in terms of inclusive schools and schools in general is this motivation question. And how many times have all of you heard that, he just doesn't cooperate at school? This is something that was told to Arjun before the shadow was inserted. So motivating a child to stay in school and attend school is very hard. It is hard sometimes. And therefore, what we generally advise and what is followed, and you can tell me better, is sometimes the methods used are to tap into the special interest of the child, looking at what the child is interested in, starting there and then hooking on to other things. And I think a lot of plays, visuals, and giving the child a lot of warmth when the child does the right thing, even if it's the smallest movement in the right direction, a lot of appreciation for that makes a very big difference. And I think in terms of visual charts and other rewards, etc., it makes. And sometimes what I also say nowadays, whatever the favorite toy of the child, just keep it in the bag. If nothing works, that will work. And a lot of environmental modulation sometimes is required in schools. I had a child who was 12 years of age, would initially cooperate in school, and then suddenly you would see after Dasara vacation, the child just didn't want to be in the class. He was stationed outside the class most of the time. We kept thinking, what could go wrong? How do we motivate this child to get back into class? Try different methods. And then when we actually did a meeting with the school, we realized what had changed after Dasara. 2 things had changed. One, there were too many people in the class. Instead of 1 teacher, there used to be 2 more helpers. And that created a sensory environment the child did not like. Number 2, the cupboards, they added 4 cupboards into the classroom. It sounds very subtle, right, when I say it, but it can make a very big difference. So sometimes to motivate the child, you need to look at it before and after and see what changed. Of course, there are many factors to consider when selecting the type of school, because the one question that I am asked most in my OPD, especially after we educate the parent about autism, is, will my child ever go to a regular school? And I've also had parents ask me, will my child be able to do medicine? Will my child be able to finish graduation? And I'm talking about 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. And honestly, nobody can answer that. But what I can tell you, I don't know. I really don't know is the answer whether the child can do that when the child is 3 years of age. But what I do know is that sometimes that type of schooling, what is referred to quote unquote special school versus inclusive school versus mainstream school versus regular school, is not as important as what the child really wants and what is the right fit for the child. See, all of us are wearing slippers and fits today. You can't wear each other's footwear. And even for a child, when you take a child, there is a shoe that fits right. The child has to wear that shoe. And as the child grows older, you change the shoe size. And you wear a shoe based on whether you're coming to work or whether I'm going to school. The type of shoes also change based on the terrain, based on the pace. So there is no right single answer to say whether a mainstream school is better. There are certain circumstances where we use a different model, where we say that let's start with perhaps a smaller school where the teacher is able to give a lot more one-on-one attention to the child. And it is not an irreversible decision, you see. Because many a times when we say let's start with an inclusive school or let's start with a smaller school, the worry is, will my child stay in this school forever? And the answer is no. These are reversible things. And the second thing that I get asked most is about academics. And sometimes there is a lot of implicit information conveyed that academics is the most important part of schooling. And we often say, and like most of you in this room will agree with me, that there are other objectives to schooling: social engagement, learning how to deal with emotions, networking, learning how to greet a person. I can think of 50 other things. So really there is no one size fits all. There is no single formula. And if you ask me which is the best school in Bangalore, I had a parent 2 weeks back ask me which, in terms of rankings, this is the second ranked school in terms of all India rankings for special schools, and the number 2 is in Bangalore. And I understand where the parent is coming from. In fact, I really understand, because you want to give the best to the child. But sometimes what is the best for your child, in terms of schooling, is not based on rankings. Yeah, it is based on the personal needs and the developmental profile of the child. Okay, for me this is inclusion. I took a whole lot of time to draw this, but could you please tell me what I'm trying to signify? Nelia will give a prize to whoever gets this right.
Every child has a different way of reaching to the fruit or something.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Right.
One is on a swing or something,
Right.
like this. One is using his catapult to do it. One is sitting on a lower stool. One is sitting on a higher stool. One is, that's
Ready with the basket. I told you it's going to happen right now.
Fantastic, I like that. Yeah. See, that's it, isn't it? See, because imagine you're seeing different children here to get the apple. One is using a swing. That young bloke there is using a zip line to get the apple. There is the other bloke there who's using a slingshot to get the apple. There's one already picking the apples. But now imagine if I gave the same ladder to everybody. Would they be able to reach the apple? Absolutely not. Right? So we need to be able to provide the right tools to the children to get what are educational targets and what are schooling targets. And for one, it might be in terms of, like what I said, a special school. For one, it could be in terms of an NIOS curriculum. For one, it could be partial schooling with more focus on therapies. It could vary, but it has to be personalized. So one tree, many ladders is my example for it. And I do think sometimes introducing a shadow, especially when a child is hyperactive earlier on, can make a big difference. But you must have clear targets. If I see X, Y, Z, that is when I'm going to start withdrawing the shadow. Because otherwise, no, you get caught in the whirlwind and you're not sure you're in the whirlwind. It just goes on and on. So when the child sitting tolerance improves, then if that's the target you have kept, when the target is met, please make sure that parents asking the teachers telling the parents, hey, we feel the child in these domains have improved. So we can think of, tightening down the shadow becomes very, very important. Yeah, and I really do think inclusion is not a destination. I really think it's a journey, and I think it's very, very joyful when you're able to individualize to the strengths of the child. Yeah. So we are back to Arjun again. Arjun has now entered adolescence. Arjun is 13 years old. His vocabulary continues to improve, continues to be independent with self-help skills in the same school. But now, from the last 6 months, he has anger issues. He has frequent fights with his mother. He gets and disturbed in the school bus as well. You see that, by the way, he dropped out of school bus at that point, and the mother had to go drop him because the bus wouldn't allow him. He suddenly starts becoming irregular to therapy. The school says now you discontinue him and refers him now to the pediatrician. And he gets very upset now if the routines are disturbed, if there's changes in the weather, and he's fearful to leave home without the mother, wants to be by her side all the time. This is a kid who used to do public speaking, by the way, if you remember. And he keeps seeking reassurance that nothing bad is going to happen to him. And he's very particular about the mobile phone charge. This is the old Nokia 1100, if you remember. And the charge has to be 91%. And if that doesn't happen, there is chaos at home. Yeah. So now the pediatrician and the psychologist both see. They now refer for the first time to a child psychiatrist, my teacher. So, what do you think is happening here? What are your reflections on this? You've seen Arjun from 3 years of age now. Arjun, the 3-year-old, has now become a 13-year-old. Hormonal changes. Mobile phone.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure. Okay, someone who hasn't spoken at all so far. Say something. Okay. Anyone's name starts with A? How many of your name starts with A? Okay. Yes, ma'am. With ID card, please tell me. What do you think is happening here? What are your reflections? And I'm not looking at technical terms at all. Just in terms of what's happening to Arjun according to you right now. What's happening to Arjun? One says adolescent. What do you feel is happening to Arjun? Anything that comes to mind?
I don't feel the same as adolescent.
It's adolescence. Okay. Anybody else?
Anxiety.
Sorry?
Anxiety and fixation.
Anxiety, fixation,
Sense of insecurity.
sense of insecurity,
Transitions.
transitions. Who said that? Ah, cool. Transitions. Then?
Parents telling him you have grown enough, now you get lost.
Yeah, because I see where you're coming from, ma'am, because if you can see in the last paragraph, he didn't want to be without his mother. Wherever the mother, in fact, I'll tell you how
I think
this
there's
is.
a fading of shadow.
Again, transition, fading of an intervention that he got used to for so long. Brilliant. You wouldn't believe, you said the mother thing, no? He wouldn't let the mother close the bathroom door when she went to the bathroom. He would genuinely be so distressed that something is going to happen. He wouldn't, again, expression became an issue. He started hitting himself because that was the only way he could relax himself. That is the level of anxiety. And all of you are right in your own way. But what you're most right about is that it's not one single factor. It's a combination of things. Like all of you said, it's a combination of things. It is transitions. It is part of adolescence because in adolescence is where so many factors around you and inside you change so much. It is because the shadow got weaned off of people. There was a caregiver there's a maid who was coming home. She left. Children with autism don't like changes most times. That precipitated a type of anxiety we refer to as obsessive compulsive disorder. That fixation increased. And then the school reacted by saying, don't send him to school. He had more time with his thoughts. His thoughts are anxious thoughts. He's now spending more time at home with anxious thoughts. You see how it started. It started off with a very small problem, but it's like a snowball, no? Going down the hill. It's gaining and becoming bigger and bigger in size. Yeah. So ASD is not protective against psychiatric illness. 30 years back, people believed if you had autism, you cannot develop anxiety. Over the last 10 years, 15 years, good studies say that's not true. In early intervention, here also, just like autism, here also early intervention makes a very, very big difference. Comorbidities can lead to regression, like Nelia was saying. A child who's speaking very fluently suddenly stops speaking, a child who was toilet trained suddenly starts bedwetting, a child dropping out of school, and unfortunately it affects the impact of every single support that these professionals built 10 years with Arjun. You remember when he was 3 years of age, how therapies were started? All of that can get undone if these comorbidities are not treated. If you look at a diagnostic criteria, we all have criteria, like for dengue there is a criteria, for autism also, there's a book called DSM-5. That is American Association's Guidelines for Autism. There is a criteria. Criteria says A and B. A is social communication, B is repetitive behaviors. But unfortunately, what happens is children don't read textbooks. And when you finally see it in the clinic, when we see children, this is what it actually looks like. Everyone thinks it looks like this, but when you enter transition phases, this is possibly the highest risk of how, or more commonly, what it looks like. You see the overlaps there from anxiety to mood to sleep issues to tantrums to GI problems, like Nelia was saying about the medical problems. Now you tell me where to begin. Where do you begin? Nelia, where do we begin?
Dark blue, so probably repetitive behaviors.
Those were the core autism symptoms. Those dark blues are core autism symptoms. So usually when you have a psychiatric comorbidity or a medical comorbidity, you need to treat that first. Because otherwise, what happens is all of them, I'll show you this here. So this is what happens. These are things that you need to look at. These are things that can flag you off and say that there is a risk for anxiety and psychiatric comorbidity. One is you should know what is the baseline. This is the amount of sensory issues that a child with autism has. Has that increased suddenly in the recent times? In the last 3 months, has the RRBs increased? Has sensory issues worsened? Are any triggers identified? Is it a particular place, texture? We had a kid who had developed phobia to the bell, because the bell sound. And every time there's a bell sound, then correlating that with the lift sound. So there were specific objects that were causing the anxiety. Are there any biological changes in the child? So same child like Arjun, who now suddenly has sleep-related difficulties, not falling asleep, excessive fatigue, or like Nelia was saying, any regression of skills, self-injurious behavior. Any of these answers are yes, there is a higher risk for a psychiatric comorbidity, especially anxiety. And what does the statistics say? The numbers tell you that children with autism across a lifetime end up developing at least one psychiatric comorbidity. That is 70 out of 100. 40% of those end up having more than one, that is at least 2 or more psychiatric comorbidities. Among that list, ADHD and anxiety are the most common. They are under-recognized because they are difficult to recognize. And treating them does improve outcomes, including caregiver burden, the mental health of the parents as well. While I'm talking to you about the mental health of Arjun, can you imagine and put yourself in Arjun's mother's place, not able to go to the bathroom without locking the door, being there all the time, not going to school, seeing your son hit his head on the wall multiple times a day. The mental health of the caregiver also gets vanquished. Yeah, so that's something that you need to keep in mind. We do use medications in autism. We are commonly asked, and I will handle some of these, some of the beliefs and the platitudes regarding medications. But if you ask me, when do we use medications in autism? It is for these circumstances. One is the ADHD symptoms, when there is significant hyperactivity, and when other strategies, non-pharmacological, behavioral management of autism, thus ADHD doesn't work, that's when we go to medications. The anxiety and the mood symptoms like Arjun, or when all the behavioral strategies like self-injurious behavior is there, you have tried for 6 months with a lot of good, solid, consistent behavioral therapy, it doesn't work. Because I can't let Arjun's mother continue to suffer like that, and if the behaviors are like that with Arjun, something needs to be done. Aggressive behavior, severe irritability. Severe irritability is the most common reason when all other strategies fail, and it starts affecting learning process, it starts affecting therapies, relationships, the day-to-day functioning of the child. That's when we consider medications. We are in 2018. Arjun did get out of that with medications. Yeah. So we come to 2018. Arjun is now 14. He is facing more behavioral challenges. Therapy completely drops off. Now the family who's been spending and investing so much in therapy for so many years develops financial difficulties. One meltdown in school happens, leads to expulsion. And there are relatives who now start suggesting to the mother that Arjun's autism might be due to her poor parenting. One even says that no, child doesn't have empathy, that is why he continues to do this even though he knows you're suffering. And another professional who she met recommends stem cell therapy to be done. Yeah? What are your reflections? Anybody?
By 14, I think the mother is already used to hearing all these things, but stem cell therapy at that point might have sounded tempting, I think.
Yeah, it did sound very tempting to her. She did, this is when she met me for the first time with my teacher, and she came and asked me that question. I'll tell you what I answered as well. You are also right, that's not the first time she heard it, but it was the first time that she actually felt it, because a bunch of relatives, she's from West Bengal, a bunch of relatives were actually planning to put the child in a rehab center there, take him away from her. That's the first time when she heard these comments. It really, like you have that straw that breaks the camel's back, the final straw, or the final, maybe this is better, final nail in the coffin. So this was sort of little too much for her. So you're right. So what I really understood at that point is that a lot of support systems that are built up, like including the school. Remember, a few years back he had behavior problems. School said, don't come. We had worked with the school to keep him back there. But again, because of a lot of social misconceptions, a lot of generally caregiver fatigue, it becomes difficult. And a lot of myths and misconceptions like blaming parents are very, very common. But parents start feeling the pinch of it only sometimes when things go wrong, unfortunately. And there are a lot of pseudotherapies out there. Behavior management plans that sometimes worked in childhood won't work in adolescence, because she was using token economy system. And by the time he had reached that age, token economy had outlived its usefulness. It just wouldn't work. But then you keep thinking it worked so many years back, it should work now also. But the child has developmentally moved forward, it just doesn't work. So we needed to reinvent the behavioral strategies as well. And she, because remember she had a lot of financial issues now, spending so much money on schooling and therapies, she didn't know what she could do to get more concessions and how she could meet his educational requirements. So along with a lot of things like stem cell therapy, these are things that right now don't have scientific evidence. Now again, I don't, like I said, that's why I said in the disclosure sites, no endorsements and no commitments Nelia and I have, but there's definitely no evidence as of now. And I'm not saying bad, good, I'm just saying the science and the fact of the matter is, there is a host of studies done in children with autism where all of these things on the slide have been tried but have not shown benefits. And some of them, for example, right at the bottom, stem cell therapy, we have families who have mortgaged houses, who have sold properties to do stem cell therapy. And what the invisible problem with this is, it is expensive, like I told you, it is time consuming, because time spent in doing this is time lost in therapies. And some of them, especially some of the diets, are very, very harmful. I have seen a child who was not taking any casein, any gluten for 10 years, losing calcium in the bones and having osteoporosis, which is powdering of bones. Supposed to happen to many of us as we grow older, cross 50, cross 60. But can you imagine a child like that? So like I said, I'm not trying to advocate. And really, I had a family who told me this, that I gave camel milk to my son. My son started getting better, and she started advocating camel milk to everybody else, because that's, in her, if I look at from her point of view, no, she's right. I have found something that works for my son. Let me advise other families and other parents going through this to try this. There's nothing wrong in what the mother did, but it's a little bit like this. Any idea what's happening? So if you look at the African fable as it goes, there is no rain, there is drought, do the rain dance, and then rain appears. Now, did the rain appear because of the rain dance? Exactly, right? The rain didn't appear because of the rain dance. the monsoon pattern or whatever technical reasons that are there. So just because camel milk was being given at the same time as other therapies were happening, it doesn't mean that the camel milk led to the improvements. It could have been, it's more likely that therapies led to the improvements. But if you correlate that, that is a big crucial. So just because something changed after a new treatment, it doesn't mean it changed because of it. So just because one or two cases you see those improvements, it doesn't mean it is evidence-based. Yeah. But honestly, over the years, I spent a lot of time thinking, initially in the early part of my career, why are parents still buying into some of them? But then I understood over the years that sometimes parents don't tell us this because A, they feel we don't know anything about stem cells, we don't know anything about camel milk. B, is sometimes they are scared of being judged. And sometimes the least powerful thing we can do is just to make them feel heard and validate what made them choose that option. And most times you will see parents chose that option because of caregiver fatigue, just like Arjun's mother. Decision paralysis, when you're going through so much and there's so much of headspace is occupied by a child banging their head, you are desperate to do anything and everything to make the child better. And there's a lot of grief. Arjun used to be fine till 1 year back, but look at Arjun now. So sometimes just understanding where they come from and just telling them there is no evidence does make a big difference. Like Arjun's mother was looking at financial and social benefit, these are some of the things available in India. Of course, you know about the NIOs and the school accommodations, but there are a lot of financial aids as well, including disability pensions, income tax reductions, financial planning options under the National Trust Act. So I'll show you the National Trust Act and options under that, but including transport and concessions for bus travel, train travel, not just for the child, but also for the parent as well, yeah, including the insurance scheme. So if you go to the nationaltrust.gov, you will see some of these schemes that are there, Disha, Vikas, you have the Nirmaya scheme, which is the insurance scheme. And I am not by any way saying these are perfect. These are far from perfect. And sometimes your application can lay there for 9 months to 1 year before you get the money. That's all true. But these are avenues to be explored and avenues that you can advocate to others also because they are reliable. They're definitely very reliable. It's just that sometimes getting the benefits of it could take some time. Like I told you, like the myths and the misconceptions, like how the relative told Arjun's mother, no, that's her parenting that caused it, child doesn't like empathy. Just one among many of the misconceptions. The most famous one is autism is caused by vaccines. And there is very solid data from the CDC and the WHO that says vaccines and autism are not connected. I'm talking about thousands of children in which they have studied this. And there's conclusive evidence saying that there is no connection between autism and vaccines. 20-30 years before, when there was adulterated, contaminated vaccines, where the component of mercury in the vaccine was very high, some children did develop developmental disorders. But to say vaccines causing autism would be incorrect. The other one, like Arjun's mother had heard, was people with autism lack empathy. Now, one of you is going to fill it up for me. What's the green box going to say?
They express empathy differently.
Brilliant, you're on a roll, thank you. So there's profound capacity for empathy. Everyone who's worked long enough with children with autism will realize that, you know, they express it differently, might not be in the way that you and I conceive of, but there's definite, strong, consistent expression of empathy. Autism, like Arjun's mother heard, is caused by bad parenting and excessive screen time. Yeah, there's no causal link, like Nelia emphasized repeatedly, genetics. There are several thousand factors that could go wrong, that are definitely likely to go wrong, with enough evidence, as big as a mountain of evidence to say it can go wrong. But then to say parenting is the reason for it would be extremely unfair. Therapies. More therapy equal to faster results. We've had a family where the therapy was happening 7 days a week. You had speech and OT 7 days a week, and I'm talking, guess the age of the child? 3 years. You missed it by a small margin. 2 years. Yeah? Can you imagine a 2-year-old with 7 days a week? So more therapy it's not just quantity of therapy. it's a quality of therapy. And you have to keep modifying that based on the responsiveness of the child. If you look at the National Research Council in the US data, if you look at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, they do say that it can never be, it should not be more than 25 hours. In fact, the UK, India doesn't have those guidelines, by the way. The UK guidelines say it should not, forget the number of hours. It should just be based on the quality of the child, and you can keep changing it as it goes along. But 6 days a week, 7 days a week isn't recommended anywhere. And once the child improves, therapy is no longer needed. It's another misconception that is there. Of course, the needs of the child will change, but the support should evolve and not simply end. Now, I am going to tell you my way of thinking when we say in our clinic in terms of therapies and saying, when should we discuss? Because that's a common question every parent will have, no? And every therapist also will have, saying, when is that moment when we decide we can now reduce that? The answer is there is no one moment. So they are going to have a series of incidents, and I'm going to take you stepwise through the algorithm that we follow. So step one is that you started therapy like with Arjun earlier on, 6 years, 7 years of age, and the therapy, what were your therapy goals when you started off? Were your therapy goals that narration should improve, use of pronouns should improve, it could be anything. Now, has that been met? If that's been met, then go to step two. But if it's not been met, we have to reevaluate, like I showed you that algorithm before. If it's not, interventions are not working, some questions to be asked. But if it is meeting the therapy goals, then ask yourself, is this child who I'm seeing now generalizing the skills across home, school, and the community? And if no, then you go back to step one, you continue the therapy, but focus on more generalization. Remember, I spoke about the community and the environment of the child. But yes, the child is generalizing the skills learned in therapy, then go to step three. Step three is you ask yourself, is this child maintaining gains without doing one-to-one prompts or support? If no, again, go back to step three. Consider modifying the therapy, reworking on the plan. But if yes, the child is maintaining gains, prompts are not required, cueing ins are not required, go to step four. When you go to step four, the question you need to ask yourself, is the child's daily functioning age appropriate in whichever domain you are targeting? Is it language, behavior, sensory needs? If it is no, have a maintenance plan with reduced intensity and then come back again. If it is yes, that is when you start thinking, okay, let's consider tapering or pausing therapy, but regular monitoring, regular follow-up. We go to step 5. Are there new challenges or developmental transitions like Arjun we saw with adolescents? If yes, we need to prepare to adapt the focus and the locus of therapy and working on social skills, emotional regulation. That is a sign that we can now wean off. But if the answer is no, we go back to step 4 and we continue periodic review every 6 to 12 months. So these are the things where I feel it is safe to pause or taper therapy, that when the goals have been consistently met, the child is speaking spontaneously, coming back from school and telling you what happened there. In terms of routines, timetables at school, the child is thriving. With increased time in school, the child continues to do well. And the parents, and for me this is the most important factor, you can see the confidence in the parent when they say, now we are able to manage the daily needs of the child a lot better. And then finally, there is a structured follow-up plan. So end of therapy doesn't mean we don't see them ever again. It means there is a plan for us to see them every 3 months or every 4 months for surveillance. See, if you had your, if any of you have hypertension and if your BP was high, I start you on, or somebody starts you on a medication. Now your BP becomes normal after that. Does that mean you never have to go back to the doctor? Or you never have to check your BP again? No. That does mean that sometimes from time to time a check-in will help. But these are the usual things where we consider tapering therapy. But the other interesting thing is nowadays we see a lot of situations where skills fade off very quickly because there are long breaks from therapy. And therapy centers do give breaks. These are small breaks. But we have had families where they have gone on vacation for a very long time, 2 months, perhaps a month and a half. So any long breaks in therapy can lead to fading of skills. because repetition, consistency and consolidation are very important for maintenance of skills and building on the skills. So that foundation is going to be very, very important. So long breaks in therapy are not usually advised. Yeah. So we spoke about medications, and Arjun needed medications to get over his anxiety. But there are a lot of myths that we hear commonly about medications. One is medications can cure autism. That's a no-brainer. No medication can treat core autism. I showed you those two circles: social communication, repetitive behaviors. There is no medication with an evidence base for those core symptoms. And starting medication does not mean that you failed as parents. A lot of times I hear parents say that my son has needed medications now, that means I've been a failure. It is not. It is just that that condition has just been very severe. It is definitely, it's like any other illness. If somebody develops, you are sitting in the AC room, if one of you has severe asthma and the AC has triggered off an attack, did this mean that Nidhi Foundation failed you by setting up the AC? Absolutely, right? So it's the same way, you don't fail as parents, and medication is not a measure of parenting quality. Please keep that in mind. All medications are sedative, not true. When correctly chosen and dosed, medications don't sedate. If they are sedative, we will tell you that it is going to be sedative. Yeah. Children get addicted, get hooked on, very difficult to stop medications, it will be lifelong, all not true. Everything is true. 20, 30 years back, some of this is true. But like any other field, science, outside of science, engineering, technology, medications have also evolved. And medications no longer cause addiction. There are good medications, reliable medications with a mountain of evidence. With evidence, some of them with evidence as much as paracetamol, that tells you that they don't cause addiction. The other myth is that medication is a last resort. It is not. Sometimes we see children with 6 years of age where I have started medications because the child has no sitting tolerance and they're going to therapy for 6 months, but he spends more time outside the therapist room than inside the therapist room. Now, what is the point of continuing therapy that way? Sometimes medications can help improve the impact and the effectiveness of therapy. So it is not always a last resort. Yeah, and early medication use, and it's never in isolation. We want to combine medications with other behavioral strategies as well. Yeah, doctors will prescribe medications without trying therapy. Also not true. First time, instinctively, the response is there a therapeutic strategy that we can absolutely try? Yeah. Okay, we're almost at the end of this. So Arjun is now, it's 2021, no? Arjun is now 18. The medications work, the financial benefits worked, telling the mother how to deal with her nosy relatives worked. And now Arjun has finally completed his NIOS exams. He's developed a passion for singing old Hindi songs. His parents don't know what to do next because of skill training, etc. He now finds more social difficulties, and social difficulties can sometimes prop up transition. You use the word correctly. 18, now he's going on to do more adult-like things. And suddenly in India, when you turn 18, lot of things open up, and everybody starts telling you, you are an adult now. But the problem is the child doesn't feel like an adult at that point still because of developmental reasons. Yeah, and here Arjun's mother says, I worry every day about what happens when we are not around. And that is a very common feeling that lingers with parents sometimes, especially when your children who haven't done very, very well in terms of schooling, etc. That does happen. What after us worries do creep in. But honestly, when I look at this boy, he came to us in 2006, 3 years old, spinning. Today he was doing Kishore Kumar karaoke. He was, and the idea is independent doesn't mean doing everything alone. Arjun's mother had an army of people to work with her. But that happened because she had an open mind and went to these people and said, you help me and I need help. And she never ever gave up. She never ever gave up, and that made a big difference. So planning is not just about academics or the NIO school. It's about friendships, emotional health, and she created. Arjun's mother's friends did become his friends as well. Their children did become his friends. So there was a very, very good social circle of support for Arjun. And passions like singing are more than hobbies. And like in Arjun's case today, he is a professional singer. He goes and he recently did something in the Chaudhaya Memorial Hall. It is possible to grow out of that that boundaries that are kept and say that we can use our hobbies as vocations as well. And I really, really do believe that families will need guidance and systems that can prepare, even like the mother asked, what happens after us? So there are advanced directives, there are wills that are there, and financial planning, especially for aging caregivers, is very, very important. Yeah. So I will conclude with, I have not gone further with Arjun's story because the focus was on early intervention. I've taken you through from when he was 3 years to 18 years, but today he is 22. He comes to OPD. He has such a bright smile on his face, and he comes and he comments on my shirts. He was one of the few people who has ever commented on my shirts. So he comes and says, "Dr. Suhas, very, very nice shirt." And when he comes, no, everyone in our OPD knows. He's just coming to say hi to me. He doesn't need to see me anymore, but he still comes. And I know he's doing really well because people around him have started saying, "Really? Is he on the spectrum? I didn't know." And when people around a teen or a child start saying that, that's when you feel like, okay, we have made some progress, haven't we? So I'm going to put together some lessons that I have learned over the years. And honestly, after 10 years in this field, I feel like I know very little about autism. I feel like I know very, very little, very marginally about autism, but these are things that I have learned. First one is that assessments, like I told you, should never be a one-time event. It should be re-evaluated and share updates with the family. I get very miffed when parents are given one-line summaries or one paragraph to say, from last 6 months to now, this is what has happened. Write a good summary as professionals, if you can, and please give it to the family. If a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. And I do think flexibility is not optional when it comes to autism, because for them flexibility is such an issue. So we must be flexible for them. And that does mean flexibility becomes the foundation of inclusion. There are children who are different types of learners, but unless we explore, we won't know. Each of you professionals here, you alone are small. You find a group, find your professional community, and you people become mighty. You don't have to carry any case alone. Like Nelia emphasized in those Venn diagrams or circles, you could see the number of circles around the child. More the number of circles, more the child improves. Yeah? So bring in the teachers, caregivers, extended family, have joint joint meetings with the school if you can, either as parents and as professionals as well. Don't hesitate to go all in. If you feel the child is 5 years, the mother or the father needs to spend more time, write to the father's employer and say, I think he needs to be given 6 months off. I've gone to the companies, I've gone to, including defense professionals, and this particular defense center where now I go, they just sign it. There was a particular period during my senior residency, I bugged them so much because both the parents were in the army, and the child was alone with a nanny till around 8 p.m. And very, very honest parents, and very, very sincere, very so well-meaning. So we had to do something. Going there, arguing with them, and you will realize sometimes the stigma is within us. We believe people won't understand. But once we start having those dialogues and conversations, people understand a lot better than we give them credit for and we imagine. And that did make a big difference. So if you have a parent who you feel needs to be given a sabbatical, advocate for those parents. A multidisciplinary building is not a multidisciplinary team. So if you have a therapy center, if you're part of an NGO, if you're part of a school, if you're part of any other medical setting as well, you might have all the circles that Nelia said in the same building. But if you don't talk to each other, it's useless. You need to attend each other's sessions. You need to co-write what are the goals that we are setting. You need to have team meetings and even community forums, and now technology allows you to reach places you couldn't. So having virtual groups also. This is one of my personal favorites, is find it in you to be a student again. You might have 40 years of experience in autism. You might have 10 years of experience in autism. You might be heading a unit, you might be heading an NGO, you might be heading a school. But it's very important to sit and observe what the other professional is doing. Sometimes even what a parent does. If you're going to a park, sitting and seeing what the parent does, you learn a lot. Sometimes the textbooks can't teach you. Because simply someone somewhere not too far away is doing something new in autism. Sometimes they're doing the same thing that you are doing in your setting, but just doing it better or doing it in a different way. It's our responsibility to find out. Teach. Whether you have your junior students, whether it's a colleague, whether these are observers posted in the schools or in the NGOs, find them, catch them, and teach them. Like I told you, a postman could be taught how to screen autism. It is possible. Finally, to the parents, last second one, to the parents, we might have an MD, a super specialization, we might have several degrees, but the parents still remain the expert on the child. We know all the theories, we know all the genetics, we know all the etiologies, but parents live the reality day in and day out. Their observations, their instincts, their insights are invaluable, and there always needs to be a seat at the table for the parent. Especially in autism, any team that you're part of, you need to have a seat for the parent. So finally, to end with, it takes a village to raise a child, but this is saying that one Dr. Elmi says, but it takes a child with autism to raise the consciousness of the village. The most important lessons don't come from textbooks or manuals, they actually come from the child. And they are the teachers, and we are all still learning, and we just need to go where the teacher takes us. Thank you. So this is how to reach us. We don't have Q&A. Before that Q&A, I want all of you to do me a favor, do Mimi and Nelia a favor. I want you guys to thank you for the Q&A, appreciate it, but I want all of you to do this for me. I'm going to, any three reflections, you have heard Nelia and me ramble on for so many 2 hours, I think. Whatever comes to your mind, whether you take it in your phone, you have a sheet of paper, or if you don't have a phone or a sheet of paper, discuss with your neighbor. Any three things that you take away from our sessions today. It could be a personal quip for you to make a change, it could be something you want to read about, it could be something you've understood, it could be something you haven't understood, doesn't matter. So it could be a myth, it could be a change you want to see in practitioners, a change you want to see in parents, a child or a family you thought of while you were listening to me or listening to Nelia. Yeah? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to write down 3 key reflections, and then we go to Q&A. Is that okay? Right. And time.